A black homeless veteran enters court in handcuffs, barely noticed. 7 minutes later, the entire courtroom is on its feet, saluting. What happened in between will change how you see justice, honor, and who we leave behind. Stay with me. This is a story you need to hear. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and share this if you believe no hero should be forgotten. It all began on a cold morning, one of those gray, indifferent days that blend into the next when you're sleeping on concrete. The air was stiff, the kind that claws into your bones and doesn't let go. He moved slowly, not because he wanted to, but because his joints had become negotiations between pain and memory. His name was Elias Carter, 69 years old, a former staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. His body had endured 2 wars in the slow war of poverty. His skin, lined and shadowed, told stories that no one in the room was asking to hear. The courtroom was quiet, clinical. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A few scattered attendees shuffled paperwork, tapped phones, or stared at the floor with the disinterest of routine. No one looked up when the bailiff led Elias through the doors. His wrists were shackled, his step uneven. His shoulders sagged beneath a military surplus coat 2 sizes too big and 3 decades too old. It swallowed him whole, as if trying to hide him from a world that had already forgotten him. "State your name," the clerk asked, eyes on her screen, fingers poised. His voice came and ragged, the kind of voice shaped by years of silence, cigarettes, and frostbitten nights. Elias Carter, Staff Sergeant, United States Marines. A few heads turned, not out of interest, but out of the reflexive curiosity that stirs when something breaks the expected pattern. But in a courtroom like this, names meant files, not stories. The clerk nodded, barely looking at him, and moved on. He was just another case, just another old man who hadn't gotten the memo that society had moved on without him. But not everyone remained indifferent. From the raised bench, Judge Olivia Parker had paused. Something in her expression shifted, a flicker, a tremor that wasn't quite visible but carried the weight of memory. She scanned the file in front of her again. The name, the dates, the service record, her hand, previously flipping through documents with judicial detachment, suddenly stilled. She looked up, not at the man, not yet, but through him, through time, through a story she thought had ended 2 decades ago. Her heart pounded once, then again, faster. The name Elias Carter was inked onto more than just court papers. It had been carved into a story her family never stopped telling. The man who had carried her brother through gunfire, out of a kill zone near Fallujah. The man who disappeared before she could thank him, before she could even find him. But now he was here, wrinkled, cold, tired. Not standing in ceremony, but sitting on a courtroom bench with shackles around his wrists. This wasn't a military parade or a homecoming celebration. This was a trespassing charge. This was a noise complaint behind a diner vent. This was where forgotten soldiers go. The bailiff called the case City of Newbridge versus Elias Carter. The charges were small, disturbing the peace, trespassing, resisting arrest, minor offenses, petty even. But to Elias, they had become mountains. He stood slowly, wincing as his knees protested. He had learned to walk quietly through pain. His left leg still bore shrapnel. His right shoulder still remembered the weight of the young men he carried. Mr. Carter has had several complaints lodged against him this month. The prosecutor began, young, polished, voice as rehearsed as a news anchor. The owner of Jefferson Street Cafe has filed 3 reports. Mr. Carter was repeatedly found loitering near their kitchen vent. He said it like a crime, like warming your hands on hot air was an act of defiance. What he didn't say, because he didn't know, was that Elias had never asked for anything. He didn't beg. He didn't panhandle. He simply sat near the alley's corner, where the vent's steam offered a few moments of warmth after sundown. He'd wait there, silent, sometimes with half a sandwich, sometimes with nothing at all. And every now and then, Jimmy the cook, whose father once served under Carter, would slide him something wrapped in foil, just because. But none of that made it into the official record. None of that counted when laws are measured in property rights instead of dignity. He resisted arrest, the prosecutor continued, refused to vacate when instructed. A murmur, half disbelief, crossed Elias's lips, but he said nothing. The truth was simpler and sadder. He had asked for 5 more minutes to finish his food. That was it. Just 5 minutes to not freeze. 5 minutes to remember a time when his uniform earned nods and handshakes, not citations and cuffs. Now they wanted to bar him from downtown altogether. A blanket no trespass order that included the shelter where he occasionally slept, the church where he sometimes found food, the sidewalk outside the library where he'd once read letters from friends long gone. Judge Parker's voice finally cut through the tension. "Mr. Carter, do you have legal representation today?" He shook his head. No. His public defender had been reassigned at the last minute. No one had told him until he arrived. "Would you like to speak on your own behalf?" she asked. He nodded slowly, and then, from somewhere deep within, he summoned the strength to rise again. "No excuses, ma'am," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "I just needed to stay warm." The courtroom was quiet, uncomfortably so. Parker leaned in. "Why that location?" she asked. It wasn't a legal question. It was human. He hesitated. "Then Jimmy the cook. He sometimes leaves me food. Known him since he was a boy. His father. His father served with me. Desert Storm." Parker blinked, and that name rang louder now. Desert Storm. Fallujah, Iraq. She flipped back to the file and saw it. Confirmed. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, 1975 to 1995. Staff Sergeant, a Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts. The record didn't list the specific names of those he saved, but she didn't need it to. Her breath caught. Her hand froze again. She felt time press down on her shoulders like gravity. Before she could gather herself, the courtroom doors opened. A sharply dressed man entered, moving with certainty. Leather shoes, tailored suit, briefcase gleaming. He walked straight to the defense table. "Your Honor," he said, voice crisp, "Alexander Ross. I've just been retained to represent Mr. Carter." Parker stared at him. "The court has not been informed of any new representation. It was a last-minute development," Ross replied, calm and composed. "I respectfully request a brief recess to confer with my client." Elias turned, confused. He had never met this man, never called for help, never believed help would come. "I can't pay you," he whispered. "You won't need to," Ross said, softly. "My firm is taking this pro bono." Parker's eyes narrowed. Ross, as in Ross and Parker, her late husband's former partner, the man who had stood beside her at her brother's funeral. The circle had begun to close, and no one in the room yet realized they were standing on hallowed ground. She banged the gavel. Recess, 15 minutes. But something had already shifted. In the space of 7 minutes, a nameless defendant had become a symbol. A forgotten soldier had re-entered the story, and soon everyone would remember his name, Elias Carter. Elias Carter sat quietly in the small consultation room adjacent to the courtroom, the fluorescent lights buzzing above, the walls painted in that sterile, indifferent gray common to government buildings. He didn't speak much. He hadn't in years. The lawyer, Alexander Ross, was flipping through a manila folder, murmuring under his breath, occasionally glancing up at Elias like he was trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't quite fit. Elias watched him, unsure what to make of this sudden intervention. He'd walked into court that morning, expecting nothing, preparing himself for another night on a bench or, worse, a jail cell with a thin mattress and a blanket that did nothing against the chill in his bones. But now this man in a navy suit with cufflinks and expensive leather shoes had shown up, speaking calmly, confidently, saying things like pro bono and unjust detainment. Elias had learned long ago not to trust sudden kindness. The world didn't just hand out miracles to men like him. "I looked up your service record," Ross finally said, setting the file aside. You earn more commendations than most officers ever see. And yet he paused, choosing his next words carefully. You've had no consistent support from the VA in almost 2 decades. Elias gave a quiet grunt. Lost the paperwork, he said dryly. Or maybe I lost track of time. I stopped fighting after a while. No one was listening. Ross didn't respond immediately. He pulled out a tablet and tapped something into it. Do you remember the name Olivia Parker? Elias blinked. The name stirred something in him. A whisper of a memory long buried under years of noise and cold. No, he said after a moment, unsure if it was the truth. Should I? Ross leaned forward slightly. Her brother served with you. Iraq, Fallujah, April 2004. Elias stiffened. He didn't like to talk about Fallujah. He didn't like to talk about Iraq at all. Those years were heavy, soaked into his blood and bones, filled with faces and voices he couldn't always place anymore, but some he would never forget. Lieutenant Parker, Elias said slowly, the name emerging like a fog clearing. Young, brave, always kept extra socks for the new guys. A pause. Took shrapnel pulling a medic out of the kill zone. Ross nodded. That was him. Olivia is his sister. She's the judge presiding over your case. Elias blinked, processing the words as if they were spoken in a foreign language. It didn't make sense. The woman in the black robe with the unreadable face, she was Jack Parker's sister. The same Jack who had shouted for Elias to leave him behind, bleeding and broken behind a rusted transport truck. The same Jack whose blood had soaked into Elias's flak vest as he pulled him over rubble and sandbags. Bullets cracking through the air like whips. He didn't make it, Elias said quietly, his voice barely audible. Made it to Germany. I heard, but his convoy got hit after that. I always wondered if saving him just meant he died somewhere else. She doesn't see it that way, Ross replied, his tone measured but not without compassion. She's never forgotten what you did. She spent years trying to find you. Elias exhaled, a long breath that seemed to carry the weight of years. He looked down at his hands calloused, weather-worn, lined like maps leading nowhere. Nobody finds you if you don't want to be found, he said. Ross leaned back. Maybe, but she did. And I think she's going to help you if you let her. Elias didn't reply. He wasn't ready to believe in rescue. Not yet. The court resumed 15 minutes later. Elias walked back in with Ross at his side. This time, there was a change in the room. Not loud, not obvious, but present. Attention, subtle and charged, like the quiet before a storm. Judge Parker sat composed, her face a mask of calm. But her eyes, those eyes, scanned Elias with a strange mixture of familiarity and something deeper, something like reckoning. Mr. Ross, she began, her voice formal, but with an edge of personal investment. Has your client made a decision? Yes, Your Honor, Ross replied. We're requesting dismissal of the charges on the grounds that Mr. Carter posed no threat, was not trespassing with intent to disturb, and had implied permission from the establishment. That remains to be proven, the prosecutor said sharply. We have multiple reports, 3 separate incidents. All from the same location, Ross interjected smoothly. All involving a man simply trying not to freeze to death. Judge Parker raised her hand. The prosecutor fell silent. Mr. Carter, she said, turning her full attention to the defendant. Do you recall April 17th, 2004? Silence fell. Elias stood still, like stone. Then he nodded. Yes, ma'am. Were you part of a mission near the western perimeter of Fallujah? Another nod. Yes, ma'am. Escorting a convoy. Got ambushed. Lost our comms. Pinned down. And during that firefight, did you extract Lieutenant Jack Parker while under enemy fire? The courtroom was so still, it might have been abandoned. Elias closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, they were glassy. He'd already taken a hit, but he was still yelling at me to leave him. Wouldn't stop. Said others needed me more, but I couldn't. A pause. No Marine gets left behind. There was a sound from the gallery, a chair scraping against the floor. An older man, his posture ramrod straight despite his age, stood wearing a Marine League act. His voice carried. "That's him," he said, pointing at Elias. "That's Staff Sergeant Carter. I was there that day. He saved 6 of us." Judge Parker didn't flinch, but her eyes shimmered. She tapped her gavel once. "Order," she said softly. The courtroom settled, but the atmosphere had changed. Ross glanced at Elias, whose head remained bowed slightly, as if unaccustomed to the light now being shone upon him. The prosecutor stood again. "Your Honor, we acknowledge Miss Carter's service, but this is still a matter of municipal law." "No," Parker said firmly. "This is a matter of justice." A hush swept through the room. For the first time, Parker looked directly at Elias, really looked at him, like she was seeing the ghost of her brother in the lines of his face. "Mr. Carter," she said, "we need to speak further. There are things beyond this case that must be addressed." She stood, gavel in hand. "This court is in recess." As she exited, she hesitated at the door. For a moment, she turned back. Their eyes met. "Don't go anywhere," she said quietly. "Not this time." Elias nodded slowly, uncertainly. The door closed behind her. In that single moment, he felt something shift inside him. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to it. A pause in the endless winter. A flicker of warmth, not from a vent or a cup of coffee, but from memory and the impossible possibility of being remembered. Inside her chambers, Judge Olivia Parker stood motionless, her back to the heavy oak door that had just closed behind her. The breath she'd held in the courtroom finally escaped, shaky and long, her fingers brushing lightly over the photo frame that sat nestled at the edge of her desk. It was a picture she hadn't touched in years, not out of forgetfulness, but out of preservation, as if letting her hands hold it would also let the pain bleed through. In the photo, she stood between her parents and her brother Jack, their pride etched in every smile, every straightened collar of that freshly minted Marine dress uniform. Jack had been all fire and gravity strong, brilliant, always leaning into danger as if it owed him an explanation. And now, 20 years after the IED that ended his life, the man who gave him a second chance at living had walked into her courtroom in handcuffs and worn-out boots. Elias Carter. A ghost pulled from the edge of disappearance. She sank into her chair slowly, the leather groaning under years of weight and secrets. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the old letter Jack had written home the week before his death, the one she'd read so many times. The paper had become a soft, familiar texture beneath her fingertips. In it, Jack had written about the firefight outside Fallujah, how the team was cornered and losing ground until one staff sergeant named Carter broke cover and dragged him to safety. How that act alone had shifted the outcome of the mission. Jack never used words like hero. He never needed to. He just said, "If I make it home, it's because of him." And now, 2 decades later, the man behind those words was asleep in alleyways, cited for trespassing, nearly barred from the only places that gave him warmth and bread. It was wrong, unforgivably wrong. A knock at her door startled her. Ross entered, his expression cautious, but not without purpose. He closed the door gently behind him, giving the room its gravity back. "Olivia," he said softly, the name awkward on his tongue in this space. "You look like you've seen a ghost." She gave a quiet laugh, the kind that carried no humor. "That's because I have," she said, gesturing toward the photo. Ross walked over slowly, the photograph drawing him into memory. "Jack," he murmured. God, that uniform made him look 10 years older. She smiled briefly, but the weight returned as quickly as it had left. "Elias Carter," she said, as if confirming it to herself. "It's him. It's really him." Ross nodded. "I did some digging. He disappeared off the VA's radar in 2007. Discharged with severe PTSD and a traumatic brain injury. His wife left him during his 3rd tour. He worked construction for a while, but injuries caught up with him, fell through the cracks." Olivia closed her eyes. "We didn't just forget him. Alex, we erased him. Not you, Ross said gently. You tried to find him. You launched the Veterans Housing Initiative. You built the court diversion program. All of that, it came from this. He tapped the photo. From Jack. From Carter. But none of it found him, she whispered. Until today. Ross hesitated, then asked the question she had avoided since the moment Carter entered the courtroom. What do you want to do? Olivia stared at her brother's eyes in the photo, the way they sparkled like he knew a secret the world hadn't caught up to yet. She could almost hear his voice, do the right thing. Live, even when it costs. I'm not recusing myself, she said, steel rising in her tone. I'm going to make this right. Ross didn't argue. He simply nodded. Then we need help, he said. You know the channels. Call whoever you need. Without another word, Olivia reached for her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a voice answered firm. Disciplined, unmistakably military. Colonel Matthews, she said, her voice tightening. It's Olivia Parker. I need a favor. It's about a man named Elias Carter. Back in the courtroom, Carter remained seated at the defense table, his posture slightly hunched not from shame but from exhaustion. He hadn't spoken since recess. The courtroom had emptied out, the buzz of proceedings replaced by an uneasy silence. Ross returned moments later and sat beside him. She's making calls, Ross said quietly. Elias glanced sideways, eyes tired but still sharp. Why now, he asked. Why me? Ross thought about it. Maybe because she owes you. Or maybe because the country does. Elias didn't reply. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to retreat. In that quiet space behind his eyelids, he could still hear the whine of incoming fire, the shouted commands, the chaotic ballet of life and death playing out in desert heat. He hadn't chosen to be a hero. He just refused to abandon anyone. That shouldn't have been special. That should have been normal. But here he was, remembered only because someone finally connected the dots. When the courtroom doors opened again, it wasn't with the usual creak of daily business. It was deliberate, purposeful. Judge Parker entered first, her expression composed but her pace brisk. Behind her came three men in dress blues, a full-bird colonel, a master sergeant, and a corporal holding a polished wooden case. The courtroom stirred, those remaining shifting in their seats. Elias instinctively stood, his spine straightening as if pulled by invisible command. For a second, he wasn't tired. He was Marine again. Judge Parker returned to the bench but didn't immediately reach for her gavel. Instead, she spoke directly and plainly, not as a judge, but as Olivia Parker, sister of a Marine, daughter of a grieving family, a woman who never forgot. Before we continue, she said, I must disclose a personal connection to this case. Lieutenant Jack Parker, mentioned earlier, was my brother. A ripple of murmurs passed through the gallery. Elias's brow furrowed. His eyes studied her again, this time with recognition rising like a slow tide. Olivia continued. 20 years ago, my brother wrote home about a man who saved his life in Iraq. He didn't know where that man went. None of us did. Today, I believe we found him. She turned slightly. Colonel Matthews? The colonel stepped forward. His voice was commanding, but respectful. Staff Sergeant Elias Carter, he began, the Marine Corps has been trying to locate you. Your name came up during the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative. The corporal opened the wooden case. Inside was a metal deep blue velvet cradling silver and gold. By order of the Secretary of the Navy, the colonel said, in recognition of extraordinary valor on April 17, 2004, the Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Staff Sergeant Elias J. Carter, United States Marine Corps. The courtroom gasped. The Navy Cross, the second highest military honor in the United States. Ross turned to Elias, but Elias wasn't moving. He stared at the medal like it belonged to someone else. There must be a mistake, he said hoarsely. I didn't do anything special. Just my job. The master sergeant stepped forward. And that's exactly why it matters. He said, from the gallery, the old Marine from earlier stood again. "Attention on deck," he shouted, voice clear. One by one, people stood, veterans, civilians, even the prosecutor. A room full of strangers rising not for a verdict, but for a man. Elias Carter stood there, motionless, and for the first time in years, he let the silence fill him not as a punishment, but as recognition. He wasn't invisible anymore. Someone remembered, and maybe that was enough to begin again. Elias Carter stood frozen in the center of the courtroom, the heavy silence of recognition pressing against him like the weight of armor long since shed. The rows of onlookers remained on their feet, their faces awash with something more than admiration, remorse, awe, respect, all wrapped together in a reverent hush. Even the youngest in the room, who had never seen combat or laced up boots for duty, could feel the gravity of the moment. The metal glinted softly beneath the courtroom lights, resting in its velvet cradle. Elias stared at it without reaching forward. His hands, calloused and trembling, hovered by his arm. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "I didn't save a life that day," he said low, almost inaudible. "I delayed a death." The words were not meant for applause or comfort. They were a confession forged from years of midnight doubt and sidewalk dreams that left him colder than the weather. But the colonel, stern and measured, did not allow the moment to dim. "Staff Sergeant Carter," he said firmly, "it is not your burden to carry how time unfolded. The lives you saved, the men who returned to their families, that is what we honor today. Not what happened later, but what you did when it mattered most." Elias did not answer, but the shimmer behind his eyes betrayed the storm inside. Judge Parker cleared her throat, her voice steady but layered in something more intimate now. "There's another matter to address." She stood and stepped down from the bench, something rarely done and even more rarely witnessed. Without her robes, Olivia Parker no longer looked like the authority of the courtroom, but like a sister bearing unfinished grief. She faced Elias directly. "I never got to thank you," she said. "Not just for what you did for Jack, but for giving my family 2 more weeks with him. 2 weeks of calls, of letters, of believing he might come home." Her voice wavered, but she kept going. "You changed the ending of our story. Sergeant Carter, you gave us time, and for that, I will never forget your name." Elias could barely meet her eyes. He felt exposed in a way that no battlefield ever made him feel. The courtroom might as well have vanished, because all he saw was Jack Parker again, bloodied but alive, refusing to let go, yelling at him to save someone else instead. And now here stood Jack's sister, offering a kind of salve no military commendation ever could. From the corner of the room, Jimmy the cook from Jefferson Street Cafe stepped forward, removing his hat as he approached. His voice shook with memory. "My dad used to talk about a man named Carter. He said if I ever met him, I owed him everything. I didn't know it was you, not until today. I thought you were just some quiet guy who liked the heat vents." Elias gave a faint laugh at that, barely a sound, more a shadow of the man he once was. "That vent kept me alive," he muttered. "So did your sandwiches." Jimmy smiled, eyes damp. "You saved my father's life. Feeding you was the least I could do." Behind Jimmy, a soft rustle moved through the gallery as several veterans made their way forward, one with a cane, another in a wheelchair, a few others walking slowly, united not by rank or ribbon, but by understanding. Each paused in front of Elias. Some saluted, others simply nodded. No one needed words. They all knew what had been taken, and now, however briefly, what was being returned. The master sergeant, holding the digital tablet, moved to Elias next. "Sir," he said, "we've corrected your records. The Department of Veterans Affairs has reassessed your status. You're now officially rated 100% service-connected, retroactive to your date of discharge." Elias blinked, not quite grasping it. "What does that mean?" "It means," the sergeant said gently, "you'll receive full medical coverage, housing assistance, back pay for 20 years of denied benefits, and any additional support needed going forward." Elias took a step back, overwhelmed. His mind couldn't compute the magnitude of what he was hearing. For so long, he had existed outside the system. Now the system was holding out a hand. Ross stepped up, his voice professional but deeply resolute. Our firm will handle all processing, every document, every barrier, no delays. You won't have to fight anymore. Elias nodded slowly, eyes now wet with something he had not felt in years relief. Not just that someone believed him, but that someone would fight for him. Then the prosecutor, clearly shaken, approached cautiously. He looked younger than he had an hour ago, somehow smaller. Sir, he began awkwardly, I had no idea who you were. The file didn't. I'm so sorry for how this case was handled. Elias didn't reply, and for once, silence was enough. Judge Parker turned to face the courtroom. Her voice rose not loud, but clear. In light of these extraordinary circumstances and the overwhelming evidence that Mr. Carter posed no threat and was merely trying to survive in sub-freezing conditions, all charges are hereby dismissed. She brought the gavel down with finality. Permanently. A collective exhale swept the room. But Olivia wasn't finished. She looked again at Elias. Mr. Carter, there's more. You have a choice now. You can walk out of here and disappear again, or you can let us help you rebuild. There are programs, apartments, therapy, community. You are not alone anymore. But the next step is yours. Elias looked at her, then around the room at the faces watching, not judging. For the first time he didn't feel like a case number, or a nuisance, or a ghost. He felt seen. And something inside him stirred, not resolve, not yet, but maybe the desire to stop running, maybe the desire to belong somewhere again. He nodded once. All right, he said quietly. I'll try. Olivia smiled. That's all we ever asked for. The colonel approached one last time. When you're ready, Sergeant Carter, we'd be honored to have you visit the Marine Corps base. There's a wall there that needs your name on it. Elias's eyes widened slightly. A wall for those who went above and beyond, who served with courage and stayed with honor. It's time. Elias didn't answer, but he didn't refuse either. That night, instead of returning to the shelter, he was escorted to a small, furnished apartment. Warm, clean, private, a place with a door that locked from the inside, not bars on the outside. Ross handed him a folder with paperwork, contact numbers, and the keys. On the desk in the apartment was a frame already waiting his Navy Cross, carefully mounted beside 2 recovered Purple Hearts and the faded photo of his unit from Iraq. Unearthed from a storage locker Ross had tracked down and purchased quietly. Elias stood alone in the room for a long time. He didn't sit. He didn't sleep. He just let the silence hold him. For once, it wasn't heavy. It wasn't punishment. It was space to feel, to remember, to begin again. A knock came hours later. Olivia Parker stood there, out of robes, holding a box. I brought something, she said, from Jack. Inside, a bundle of old letters written during deployment, saved by a family who never stopped grieving. She handed him one. This one mentions you. Elias took it with shaking hands, the past unfolding in black ink. Jack's words read yesterday. Staff Sergeant Carter saved my life. I told him to leave me. He said, not today, not on my watch. I hope one day I can live up to that man. Elias looked up, voice cracking. He did. He more than did. Olivia nodded. Then let's make sure the world knows you did, too. And for the first time in years, Elias Carter smiled not with pride, but with peace. A kind of peace he never thought he'd be allowed to feel. A kind of peace that meant someone, somewhere, finally remembered his name. The sun filtered softly through the window blinds of Elias Carter's new apartment, cutting clean lines across the hardwood floor, where dust floated like slow-moving memories. It had been 3 days since the courtroom changed everything. 3 days since his name was said not with suspicion, but reverence. 3 days since he had stood in front of a room full of strangers and realized he was no longer invisible. And still, Elias hadn't quite adjusted. The quiet here felt different, cleaner somehow, but it unsettled him. He had grown used to the chaos of the streets, the noise of distant sirens, the rustling of plastic bags caught in wind, the unspoken code among those forgotten by the world. Here, the silence was surgical. It left him too much room to remember. He sat on the edge of the bed, his bed, though it still didn't feel like his, staring at the medals mounted on the wall. The Navy Cross shone with an unapologetic pride. Next to the two Purple Hearts in a faded black and white photo of a younger version of himself, surrounded by men he hadn't spoken to in years, some of whom would never speak again. Elias's hand hovered over the frame. It felt both like a tribute and a weight. Every time he looked at it, the whisper in his mind returned. Why me that morning? He had a meeting. Not with lawyers or Marines, but with a counselor from the Veterans Housing Program. Her name was Teresa Ng. She was young, energetic, and too kind in a way that made Elias uncomfortable. But she had not treated him like a case number. Instead, she brought him a hot cup of coffee and a notebook and said, "When you're ready, you can write it down. Or don't. I'll be here either way." She was waiting for him now downstairs in the community center lobby. Elias looked in the mirror. His face was lean, carved by years of hard living, but his posture was changing, slowly. It wasn't just his back straightening, it was the return of identity. Not Staff Sergeant Carter, not the man behind the cafe, but someone in between. He grabbed the coat they had issued him, a clean, standard-issue parka, and walked to the elevator. The ride down was slow, each floor ding marking a different kind of descent. When the doors opened, Teresa looked up from her phone and smiled. "You made it," she said brightly. "Wasn't sure if you would." Elias shrugged. Wasn't sure either. They walked out onto the sidewalk together, the cold air biting but manageable. It was early, the city not yet fully awake. "Let's go somewhere quiet," Teresa said. "I want to show you something." He didn't ask questions, just followed. The city around them was still shaking off the night. Elias noticed things others didn't, the way people avoided eye contact with those sleeping on benches, the way businesses hosed down sidewalks, not just to clean, but to drive people like he used to be away. After 20 minutes of walking, they reached a nondescript building near the edge of downtown. It was old but cared for, its bricks solid, its windows clean. Teresa opened the door and gestured him inside. The hallway smelled like cedar and fresh paint. They passed a few rooms with nameplates and numbers until they stopped in front of a door with a simple brass plaque, Veteran Story Project. Interview Room A. Elias frowned. "What's this?" Teresa unlocked the door and pushed it open. Inside was a modest room, soundproofed, with two chairs facing each other and a recording set up in the corner, a microphone, a camera. "This is where veterans come to tell their stories," she said, "on their terms, no edits, no filters. We archive them, preserve them. Some we share with families, some go to the National Library, some we just keep until someone's ready to listen." Elias took a step back. Why would anyone want to hear mine? Teresa didn't answer immediately. She walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a box. Inside were printed transcripts, bound and labeled. Because stories matter, not just the ones about medals or battles, but the ones about survival, about being forgotten and then found, about loss and quiet acts of courage. Elias looked around the room, then at the chair in front of the mic. "I'm not a good speaker." Teresa laughed. "Perfect. The best stories aren't rehearsed, they're remembered." After a pause, Elias moved toward the chair and sat down. He didn't speak at first. The silence between him and the mic felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Teresa didn't press him. She simply hit the record button, then stepped out, closing the door behind her. Alone, Elias stared at the red light glowing faintly on the camera. "Name's Elias Carter," he said after a long pause. "Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired." Sort of. He took a breath, rubbing his hands together. "I don't know where to start. They say start at the beginning, but which beginning? The first deployment, the first time I stopped dreaming in color, or maybe the first night I realized the war doesn't end when the paperwork says it does. He paused, then leaned slightly forward. People think being homeless is about losing a place to sleep. It's not. It's about losing a place in the world. You stop being a man. You become scenery, something to walk past, something to pretend isn't there. He told the story in fragments, of sleeping under bridges, of frostbite, of the time he watched a man overdose beside him and held his hand until his pulse stopped. He talked about his wife, how she couldn't wait anymore, how the letter stopped, how his daughter moved away and stopped calling. Then he spoke of Fallujah, not as a hero, but as a man doing his job, the things he did, the faces he carried, and finally of Jack Parker. He wouldn't let me leave him. But I couldn't leave him either, Elias said. He bled all over my flak vest, told me to tell his sister something, and I never got to. Until now, he didn't remember how long he talked. When he finally stopped, the camera light was still glowing, and for the first time, Elias didn't feel like he was talking to no one. Someone would hear. Someone would know. That afternoon, Teresa found him sitting in the small garden outside the center, coat buttoned, hands buried in his pockets. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "I think I needed to hear myself say it. You did good." "Did I?" She sat beside him. "Elias," she said gently, "you're allowed to be more than what happened to you. You're allowed to live, not just survive." He looked at her, searching for a trace of condescension. There was none. Just a young woman who believed he could matter again. "That's going to take time," he said. "We've got time," she replied. Later that evening, Elias returned to his apartment and found an envelope taped to his door. Inside was a note, handwritten in looping cursive. "Mr. Carter, I watched the hearing. My brother served in your unit. He came home because of you. I wanted to say thank you." Tucked beneath the note was a small dog tag, weathered, etched with a name Elias hadn't heard in years. Another one he thought had been lost. He closed the door behind him, sat in the dark, and held the tag tightly in his fist. He was still here, and finally the world was starting to remember. It was nearly midnight when Elias Carter found himself standing before the mirror in the dim glow of the bathroom light, his reflection unfamiliar yet strangely intimate. The man staring back at him wore a clean undershirt and sweatpants provided by the housing program, his beard freshly trimmed, hair combed back with care. The deep lines in his face had not vanished, but something in the eyes once dull from years of fading into shadows now sparked with the faintest trace of attention. Not pride, not yet, but alertness. Purpose. A knock at the door startled him. He froze, instinctively reaching for nothing, then exhaled and moved toward the sound. When he opened it, he found Ross, the lawyer, standing there in a navy coat, holding a thin folder. "Didn't mean to drop in this late," Ross said, "but I have something you should see." Elias stepped aside without a word, motioning him in. The apartment was quiet, the warmth from the radiator humming softly through the walls. Ross placed the folder on the small table near the kitchenette and opened it slowly. "Do you recognize these names?" he asked. Inside were half a dozen printouts, profiles, scanned documents, short bios. Elias leaned over, eyes scanning the pages. Then he froze. "Cruz, Jackson, Nguyen," he whispered. "Bravo Squad." Ross nodded. "Some of them are in Baltimore now. Others spread out, but they've been looking for you since you went off the grid. One of them found your name after the story hit local news. The video from the courtroom, it went viral." Elias straightened, uneasy. "What video?" "The courtroom footage. The moment they awarded you the Navy Cross, someone recorded it, posted it online. It's been shared over 1 million times." Ross handed him a tablet and tapped the screen. The video played a quiet opening with the judge recounting her connection to Jack Parker, then the colonel's speech, then the presentation of the medal, the room rising to its feet, Elias standing still, lost in it all, watching himself. Elias felt his throat tighten. He had lived through that moment from the inside. but seeing it from the outside made it real in a way he hadn't expected. He had not just been seen, he had been witnessed. "People remember you now," Ross said. "They're asking where you are, what you need, how they can help." Elias turned off the tablet and set it down slowly. "I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," Ross replied. "Not unkindly, but sometimes history finds its way back, and you either embrace it or let it bury you again." Elias nodded slowly. "And what if I'm not ready?" Ross gave a slight smile. "Then you take one step at a time. That's all anyone's asking." The next morning, Elias received a message from Teresa asking if he'd be willing to attend a veterans support circle held every Thursday evening. No pressure, her text said, just coffee and folks who get it. He debated ignoring it, but something pulled at him, a strange curiosity. That night, just as the sun dipped beneath the rooftops, Elias walked into the community center, hands deep in his coat pockets, heart pounding like he was stepping back onto foreign soil. The room was softly lit, with chairs in a loose circle and a coffee urn steaming in the corner. Maybe 10 people were there, men and women of various ages, some young enough to be his grandchildren, others older than him. Teresa greeted him with a nod. "No fuss." "Welcome, Bayadu." "Elias," she said, "you can sit wherever you like." He took a seat near the edge, unsure if he'd speak at all. The session began gently, no grand declarations, just small admissions, passing reflections. A woman in her 30s shared how she couldn't sleep unless the television was on, how silence felt like a minefield. A man with a prosthetic leg admitted he hadn't looked in a mirror since the explosion, didn't like the face he saw now. Then, after a lull, someone turned to Elias. "What about you?" a voice asked. "Your story's been all over my feed. You're, that guy." Right, Elias shifted. The room didn't lean in, didn't pressure. They just waited. So he began, slowly. "I was a Marine," he said, "served 20 years. Vietnam, Iraq. Last tour ended with a convoy ambush outside Fallujah. I pulled someone out. He didn't make it. Not long after, but for years. People thought that made me something. Truth is, I was just trying not to let anyone die on my watch." The room was quiet, listening, not judging. Elias continued. "When I got out, things unraveled. I lost my wife. My daughter stopped calling. My paperwork got lost in some office drawer. And I stopped existing in the ways that counted." A pause. "I wasn't angry. I was tired. I found heat vents in back alleys, learned the quiet parts of the city where no one looked you in the eye. I didn't want charity. I wanted not to freeze." One man nodded, another sipped his coffee. A woman across from him whispered, "I know what that's like." And just like that, something settled in the room, a shared grief, but also a strange, quiet dignity. After the meeting, Teresa caught up to him outside. "You didn't have to say anything, but I'm glad you did." Elias looked up at the night sky. "Me too." Days passed. Elias began to settle into routines. Small ones, morning walks, reading letters Jack had written to his sister, organizing the few items he owned. He even found a nearby community kitchen where he volunteered twice a week, helping chop vegetables or clean dishes. The first time he held a chef's knife again, his hands remembered movements from long ago, back when he cooked for his unit in between missions, back when he felt useful. Word spread, local reporters reached out for interviews, which he declined. But one day, he received a letter from a high school in the city, inviting him to speak at their Veterans Appreciation Assembly. The letter was handwritten, signed by 20 students. "We want to hear your story. We want to learn what honor really means." Elias stared at it for a long time, then, slowly on. He folded it and placed it on his nightstand. That Friday, he stood behind a podium for the first time in his life. Nervous, unsure, wearing the only blazer he owned, a gift from Ross. The gym was packed. Rows of teenagers sat quietly, respectful. When he began to speak, his voice was low, unsure, but it grew stronger. "When I was your age," he said, "I thought courage meant charging ahead. I thought honor came from medals, but it doesn't. It comes from what you do when no one sees, when no one thanks you, when no one remembers. He didn't speak long, but when he finished, the room rose to its feet, not because of the Navy Cross, not because of viral fame, but because truth, spoken quietly, still echoes. That night, back in his apartment, Elias sat down and began writing. Not a speech, not a testimony, just words. For himself, for the ones he carried, for the man he was becoming. He ended the entry with a single sentence. Maybe the war isn't over, but I'm not lost in it anymore. Then he slept, and for the first time in years, he did not dream of sand or blood or fire. He dreamed of open roads and warm rooms, of names remembered, of silence that didn't hurt. A light spring rain drizzled softly across the windows of the community center as Elias Carter sat at a table near the back of the room, sipping lukewarm coffee from a white paper cup. Around him, the Thursday support group had just finished their session. Laughter and low conversations swirled in the air like smoke, the sound of lives cautiously rebuilding themselves one word at a time. Elias had come every week since that first one. He didn't always speak, but when he did, others listened. His voice once a weapon, then a whisper had become something of an anchor among the group, and still he often wondered how any of it was real. He looked out the window. Beyond the fogged glass, the streets of Newbridge moved with routine indifference, cars splashing puddles, passers-by ducking under umbrellas, the city busy being a city. He no longer lived on its fringes, but some part of him remained wary, watching for the world to shift again, to strip everything away just as quickly as it had arrived. You doing okay? Teresa's voice broke through gently. She sat down beside him, peeling the lid off her own coffee. You looked a little far off there. Just thinking, Elias said, offering a small smile. Didn't mean to drift. That's allowed, she replied. Some days, drifting's how we stay afloat. He appreciated that about her. Her words never tried too hard to inspire. They just settled where they were needed. He turned to her, something flickering behind his eyes. I got a call yesterday, he said slowly. From the Department of Defense. Teresa straightened, interested but calm. What about their organizing a formal ceremony next month? Said they want to make the Navy Cross presentation official. They've invited members of the press, local leadership, military officials, whole 9 yards, and they want me to speak. Teresa paused, watching him carefully. Are you going to? Elias didn't answer right away. He rubbed his thumb along the paper seam of his coffee cup, staring at the table's grain as if searching for something embedded within it. I don't know. He said finally, I don't like stages. I don't like lights. Never did. And what am I supposed to say? That it took them 20 years to remember I existed. Teresa tilted her head. Considering, maybe you say exactly that. Or maybe you say something else. It's your story. You don't have to make them comfortable with it. That last line settled deep. Elias gave a slow nod. Later that evening, back in his apartment, he sat by the window with the lights off. The rain had turned to mist, curling across the street lamps outside. He thought about the ceremony and about the young Marines who might be there, their uniforms crisp, boots polished, believing in duty and honor the way he once had. He thought about the Gold Star families, the politicians who would shake hands and make speeches, the photographers who would angle their shots just so. He thought about Jack Parker. He retrieved the bundle of letters from the drawer near his bed, the ones Olivia had given him. He didn't read them often, but tonight he needed Jack's voice. He found one dated a few days after the ambush. Liv, I've never seen anyone move like Carter did. He didn't just save my life. He changed how I see what leadership looks like. He didn't shout. He didn't freeze. He just acted, like he already knew the kit and chose to carry it anyway. Elias closed the letter and leaned back. His decision was made. He would speak, but it wouldn't be for medals or ceremonies. It would be for Jack and for the men who never got to come home. The weeks passed in quiet momentum. The news of the upcoming ceremony spread, and with it came interviews, requests, outreach from people who had once served with him or been impacted by his story. He received a letter from a young Marine stationed overseas who wrote, "Reading about you made me stop drinking for the first time in 6 months. If you can come back, maybe I can too." Elias didn't write back, but he kept the letter. On the morning of the ceremony, Elias dressed slowly. The suit Ross had tailored for him fit snug but comfortable. A navy blue tie, a silver tie pin engraved with the Marine Corps emblem. He hadn't worn anything like it in years. In the mirror, he saw a man transformed not into someone new, but into someone recovered. Olivia picked him up herself. She wore a charcoal dress and a thin bracelet that Elias recognized it had belonged to Jack. The drive to the ceremony was quiet. Neither of them needed to speak. The silence between them was no longer a barrier, but a bond. The hall was full by the time they arrived. Rows of guests, Marines in dress uniforms, civic leaders, old veterans with caps and medals on jackets. A stage had been prepared, a podium standing under the glow of soft lights. Elias walked in, and the room shifted. Not with whispers, not with noise, but with presence. Wrong. They stood, again. This time not as a courtroom surprise, but as a deliberate choice. He nodded slightly, grateful but humbled, then took his seat near the front. The ceremony began with standard formalities, presentations, introductions, a brief speech from the colonel who had delivered the Navy Cross in court weeks ago. He spoke of courage, of legacy, of sacrifice that outlasts memory. Then came Elias's turn. He rose slowly and made his way to the podium. The room fell into respectful stillness. He looked out over the sea of faces, young, old, uniformed, civilian, and began, "Most of my life, I believe that when you do something right, you don't wait for applause. You just do it, and you move on. That's what we were taught. That's what I believed when I carried Lieutenant Jack Parker out of that ambush in Fallujah." A pause. "I didn't expect a medal. I didn't expect to be thanked. I didn't expect anything. And for a long time, that's exactly what I got, nothing." The audience was silent, listening. For years after I left the service, I slipped through cracks I didn't even know existed. My body gave out. My mind followed. I slept on benches and in alleys, not because I chose to, but because I thought I had nowhere left to go. A long breath, and then something happened. I got arrested, a soft ripple of laughter, not mocking, but warm. Elias allowed a faint smile. And that arrest led me into a courtroom where a judge remembered my name, where a lawyer I'd never met stood up for me, where a cook I thought had long forgotten me stepped forward. And suddenly I wasn't invisible anymore. He looked directly at the front row, where Olivia sat. Jack Parker once told his sister that he hoped to become the kind of man I was. But the truth is, I hoped to be the kind of man he was. Brave, compassionate, unflinching. Elias's voice grew steadier. "This medal," he said, gesturing to the Navy Cross pinned to his chest, "isn't just for me. It's for everyone who never got theirs. For the ones who came home and got lost. For the ones who never came home at all. A beat. And for those still searching for a way to be seen." He paused, then finished. "I'm not a hero. I'm a reminder. That honor doesn't fade. That dignity doesn't disappear. And that no one who serves this country should ever be forgotten." When he stepped back from the podium, the silence that followed wasn't hollow, it was full of understanding, full of memory. Then came the applause. Not thunderous, not performative, but honest, sustained. Elias returned to his seat, not feeling elevated, but anchored. After the ceremony, as the hall emptied, a line formed, people wanting to shake his hand, share their stories, thank him. Elias took each one with quiet grace. That night, back in his apartment, Elias placed the folded speech beside Jack's letters. He sat on his bed, unlaced his shoes slowly, and looked again at the medals on the wall. But this time, he didn't look at them as burden or symbol. He looked at them as chapters. Finished, honored, complete, outside. The wind carried spring's first warmth. And for once, Elias Carter didn't brace for the cold. He just let it be. The morning after the ceremony, Elias Carter woke to sunlight pouring through the sheer curtains, casting pale gold across the wooden floors of his apartment. For a moment, he didn't move. His body, once so used to jolting awake from sidewalk sounds, car horns, and cold concrete, now stretched in slow disbelief at the softness of the bed, the silence that wasn't menacing but peaceful. He sat up and placed his feet on the floor, the world still quiet around him. The tie he'd worn to the ceremony lay draped over the chair, the speech neatly folded beside Jack Parker's letters. The Navy Cross remained pinned to the lapel of the blazer. Still catching glints of morning light, Elias stood, walked toward the small kitchenette, poured himself coffee from the automatic machine, one of the many things Ross had made sure the apartment had, and sat at the table. He thought about the day before, about the applause, the lines of strangers wanting to shake his hand, the young Marines who looked at him like a living legend. He didn't feel like one. He still felt like a man in the middle of becoming. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. When he opened it, Olivia Parker stood there, dressed simply in jeans and a navy blouse, holding 2 takeaway coffee cups in a paper bag. "I figured you might not have breakfast," she said with a smile. "And if you tell me you like cold coffee, I'm turning around." Elias stepped aside. "I'd never be that ungrateful." She entered, moving with a familiarity that had grown in the weeks since their reunion. They sat together at the small dining table, unpacking the bag fresh bagels, cream cheese, and a slice of apple pie. "I had them throw in the pie," she said, "Jack's favorite." Elias smiled faintly. "He used to steal it from the mess hall," he said. "Swore nobody made apple pie like his mom." Olivia looked down at her cup, then back up at Elias. "You changed yesterday," she said softly. "Not because of what you said, because of what you gave." He raised an eyebrow. "And what was that permission?" She replied. "To grieve, to believe. You didn't just remind people of sacrifice. You reminded them of grace." Elias didn't know how to answer that, so he said nothing. They ate in companionable silence for a while, until Olivia set her cup down and pulled out a small envelope. "There's something else I wanted to give you," she said, handing it across the table. "Something I think Jack would want you to have." Elias opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph, one he hadn't seen before. It showed a younger version of him and Jack standing outside a bunker, laughing at something unseen behind the camera. Their uniforms dusty, faces tired, but the bond between them obvious. Elias touched the edge of the photo with his thumb, his expression unreadable. "I didn't even know this existed," he murmured. "Jack sent it home with a letter." Olivia said, "My parents kept it in a box after he died. I found it a few years ago, but I wasn't ready to look at it. Not until now." Elias looked at her. "Thank you," he said simply. She nodded. "You gave me back a part of him I didn't know was still out there." That afternoon, they walked together to the Veterans Memorial Park on the edge of the city. The park was quiet, tucked away behind rows of red maples just beginning to bloom. A newly engraved plaque had been added near the center, surrounded by a ring of bricks with the names of local servicemen and women. On the plaque, Elias's name was etched below the Navy Cross insignia: Elias J. Carter, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, service and sacrifice, beyond recognition. He stared at the inscription, hands in his coat pockets. "Too many names missing," he said. Olivia nodded. "That's why we're expanding it. Your story brought attention. Donations. We're building a new wing with interactive exhibits, letters, interviews, archives. Jack's letters. Your story. Others like it. People need to remember. People need to listen." Elias corrected. "Remembering's no good if it doesn't change anything." Olivia looked at him for a long moment. "Then help us. Be part of it." That evening, Elias sat down with Teresa at the Veterans Center. They discussed program outlines, schedules, in the concept for a peer mentorship circle for homeless vets re-entering civilian life. You'd lead it, she said. No pressure, but I think they'd trust you. Elias wasn't sure. He hadn't led anything since Iraq, but the idea stayed with him. The next morning, he returned to the recording room where he had first told his story. This time, he didn't need prompting. He sat down, looked into the lens, and spoke directly. This is for the ones still out there, he said. I know you think no one sees you, that no one's coming, that maybe the best you can hope for is to vanish quietly. But I'm here to tell you we see you now. You matter, and we're not leaving you behind. That recording would later be played at shelters, transitional housing units, and military town halls across the country. The line "We see you now" would become the program's slogan. A month later, Elias met with a group of 6 veterans, men and women recently brought off the streets. Skeptical, hollow-eyed, and unsure. He didn't begin with introductions. He didn't tell them who he was. He just said, I've been where you are, and I'm still standing. Over the following weeks, that group grew. Some returned to school, others reunited with families. One even wrote a book. And Elias, he finally understood what survival could become when it was no longer just about breath, but about impact. One morning, as spring turned fully into summer, Elias received a letter in the mail. It was written in careful handwriting and signed by a name he hadn't heard since his last deployment. Staff Sergeant Carter. I don't know if you remember me. My name's Private Daniel Moore. I was 19 when you pulled me from that overturned Humvee into Crete. I thought you were just another ghost from a story, until I saw the video of your ceremony. I cried watching it. You saved me, and I've spent the last 2 decades trying to live up to that. I became a teacher. I have 3 kids. They know your name. Elias folded the letter with trembling hands. Later that day, he visited Jack Parker's grave. The sun was bright, the grass trimmed neatly around the headstone. He stood there for a long time, silent. Then he reached into his coat and placed something at the base of the stone, a patch from his original unit, worn but still intact. We're good, Jack, he said softly. We made it home. As he turned to leave, he felt lighter, not because the past had vanished, but because he had stopped running from it. He wasn't lost anymore, not forgotten, not invisible. He was part of something again, part of a new story, one where no one was left behind. And as the wind moved gently through the trees around him, Elias Carter walked on each step forward, not just for himself, but for all those still trying to find the road back.